It is now 7 o'clock. I have just started recording the meeting. Hello, everyone. Welcome to Aura's first candidate forum for the 2020 City Council elections. Thank you all so much for being here. Today we broke up our candidate forums into three sections so we'd give each candidate enough time to give their views, hear what they have to say, and because we're Aura, we like to dig into the weeds, so give everyone a chance to get into them. If you're just joining us, please stay on mute for the remainder of the forum. If you have questions, I encourage you to put them into the chat, and after a set of selected questions, we'll be asking those questions to our candidates. The process for today is that we will be asking one question and then giving both of our participants today a chance to answer that question, and then following those questions, we will have some that were asked from the audience. The questions for today were given in a questionnaire that the candidates received earlier, and then we'll be able to publish those responses for anyone who is not able to be here today at a later date. We invited all candidates for districts 2 and 7. We received a response from Councilmember Poole for District 7 saying that she is unable to attend. We also received a notice from Vanessa Fuentes, a candidate for District 2, who said that she was able to attend, but then regrettably had to back out due to other obligations. She did, however, give us questionnaire answers, so I will be reading verbatim her questionnaire answers for the ones that are like for like. We do have with us today, though, District 2 candidate David Chincanchan and District 7 candidate Morgan Witt. Thank you both very much for being with us today. Again, my name is Cesar Acosta. I'm the president of Aura. Aura is an urbanist advocacy group here in Austin, and we've worked for the last, I don't know. Jason, how many years have we been working to make Austin a more connected, livable community? Shakes his head several times.
6 or 7, I would say.
6 or 7 years. So we're working towards that. And we feel one of the best ways to make Austin a more equitable, sustainable, and connected environment is to make sure that we have elected officials who share that vision. So I'm going to go ahead and start the candidate forum with our first question. And again, I'll ask the question, ask one of the candidates to respond, give the next candidate the chance to respond, and then I will read the questionnaire response that we got from the candidates who were not able to attend. And then afterwards, we'll move on to the next one. But first, I do want to give each candidate a chance just to say who they are, why they're running, and just give them a couple, about 2 minutes each to talk. So we're going to go ahead and give this first one to David. You have 2 minutes.
Thanks, Cesar. Well, hey, y'all, I'm glad to be here, and I share your values of creating a more equitable, sustainable community. And I just wanted to briefly introduce myself. My name is David Chincanchan, and I am the former chair of the Austin Tejano Democrats. I serve on the executive committee of the Texas Democratic Party. I serve on the board of my local labor union, AFSCME 1624, and I've had the chance to work with a lot of you during my time working at City Hall as a policy advisor and chief of staff for Councilmember Renteria, working on affordable housing and public transportation issues. And more recently, I had the chance to work with Travis County Constable George Morales, making sure that our community is counted in the 2020 census so that we are able to receive the resources that we deserve, and providing food, protective equipment, and other essential services to our neighbors in Southeast Austin. And throughout, as we talk about these issues, I'm going to mention again that our community is being disproportionately impacted by the pandemic. And the reasons for that is that we have been historically neglected for decades and decades. And that has resulted in vast discrepancies when it comes to access to affordable housing, when it comes to food security, economic, employment, educational opportunities. And so I'm running to help correct those injustices, to help address those disparities. And I am really grateful for Mayor Pro Tem Garza's leadership on so many of these issues. But the reality is that, this isn't something that one person can solve, that one council member can solve, that one election will solve. These are issues that are going to require our entire community to come together to address. And I am looking forward to working with all of you on every single one of those things. Thanks.
Thank you, David. Morgan, your time.
Thank you, Cesar. Hi, everybody. My name is Morgan Witt. I'm an educator and a community advocate, and I'm running for District 7 as the boldly progressive candidate that I think Austin needs right now. Not to piggyback on David, but it sounds like we've both identified the fact that there are a lot of things in Austin that can improve. And as a born and raised Austinite, I know that my Austin experience is not the Austin experience that everybody has the opportunity to live. And, you know, I've, over the last several years, through teaching, through workforce training and development, and through my volunteer experience with underrepresented and underserved communities, I've learned the power of coming together as a community, being more connective and inclusive and welcoming, and supporting people by giving them access to resources and opportunities that they need to thrive. But it's kind of been a rude awakening as an Austinite, recognizing that we have a very deep sense of pride in how liberal and progressive we are, and yet we're still the most economically segregated city. We still have huge disproportionate impact of economic downturn, of public health crises, and lack of resources and access to things like transportation and affordable housing for communities of color and other marginalized communities. And so I'm here not only to help achieve these changes that we need so that we can have an Austin for all, but even to just acknowledge that they exist. I think that we need to recognize that people need our help, and we really need to come together to implement effective solutions that help everybody. So I'm really glad to be talking with everybody here today. And as I said, it sounds like we have very aligned values and priorities for Austin's future. Thank you.
Thank you, Morgan. For anyone who's just joining us, please stay on mute for the remainder of the forum. If you have questions, please write them in our chat box. And after some selected questions, we're going to be reading those to the candidates. Our first question, again, these are from the questionnaire that each of the candidates were given previously. So I'll go ahead and read the question. Each candidate will have a chance to respond. First question is, what do you see as the top challenges and priorities unique to your district? Morgan, you want to go ahead and take the first one?
Yeah, I'd love to. You know, District 7 is a much more diverse district than perhaps our representation suggests. And so I see a lot of interconnected issues that we're facing. One is the underrepresentation of a comprehensive transportation and mobility network, especially for those who are on the northern and northeastern ends of the district. I see an affordability issue where people continue to be pushed out of central neighborhoods toward the fringes of the city limits. I see, as a consequence, serious concerns about sustainability and the quality of our air and of our environment. And then kind of underpinning those issues is this problem of equity, right? As we've kind of already talked about, efforts so far to achieve affordability or make mobility and transportation more accessible haven't been as inclusive as they should be. And then kind of tying into all of that is the idea of civic engagement and participation. Are we really engaging our residents the way that we can be? And are we collecting feedback proactively and regularly from all communities to make sure the decisions that we make represent everybody? So that's just kind of how I see things affecting District 7 right now.
Thank you. David, same question.
Thank you, Cesar. And I'll echo some of the same stuff that I said in my introduction. You know, one of the reasons I'm proud to be running for District 2 is that I was raised here. That, you know, this is my community. It's where I've lived most of my life, and it's where the people that I know and I love are. And so, but growing up in Dub Springs, we faced a lot of challenges, and those challenges have only intensified as our city has grown for the families that are here now. And so I'll say again, you know, the pandemic has really laid bare some of the worst discrepancies that are present in our community. And that includes, lack of access to quality healthcare during this pandemic. It includes those pre-existing conditions that I was talking about, like housing instability and food insecurity and the lack of economic opportunity. And in District 2, we have frontline workers who are being asked to risk their lives without a whole lot of choice, with very little protection, and with little compensation as well. And so I think some of the addressing those disparities, I think, is at the top of our priority list. And for us, that means working on, not just addressing that immediate health concern with the pandemic, and not just addressing the effects of climate change, which are already being felt, but focusing on 3 priorities, which is providing access to safe, healthy, and affordable housing, access to frequent, reliable, and affordable public transit, and access to quality education and economic opportunity, which involves, addressing our housing and transportation crises, but also providing more job training and opportunities for, kids coming out of high school and, and other families, and just protection for those workers that we consider so essential.
Thank you. I will now read the answer that Vanessa Fuentes gave in our questionnaire. Her response was, District 2 has one of the lowest socioeconomic populations in the city of Austin. As the city gets more expensive, working class Austinites are struggling to afford to stay in Austin. The eastern part of District 2 is a food desert and with very few healthy options, compounded by limited access to health services and limited access to high-speed internet. My community is nearly 30% uninsured and categorized as park deficient. The next question I'll ask is related to our housing strategic blueprint. It calls for the creation of 60,000 units of affordable to households making 80% of the MFI, which is the median family income. And it calls for the creation of 75,000 units affordable to households making over 80% of the MFI over the next 10 years. What steps will you take to make that a reality? And I'll pose that first to David.
Well, thanks again. I want to emphasize the central focus of our campaign, which is to better the lives of working families and to help create an Austin for all. And what we mean by that is creating a community where every single family, regardless of where we come from, has the opportunity to pursue their dreams and achieve their potential. And in order to be able to realize that, we need to build opportunity. And so when we think about, what are the biggest barriers for families in our district and in our city? And those are the highest expenses to families, which is housing, childcare for the families that need it, and transportation. And I think that the goals outlined in the strategic housing blueprint help us address a lot of those issues. And so I fully support them, and I'm committed to taking bold action on housing goals to create more missing middle housing and more affordable housing. And I absolutely support the council's direction that they gave to create all types of homes for all kinds of people in all parts of town. And so I think that implementing the strategic housing blueprint is going to be something that this council, next council, and the one after that is going to really have to prioritize and focus on. And I don't know if we're likely going to talk about the land development code in some of the future questions, but I think there's a lot that we can do there to align with those goals, including allowing more opportunities for that missing middle housing, and allowing smaller homes on smaller lots, and just in general aligning our land development code with the city's analysis of impediments to fair housing. And that it doesn't just involve affordable housing, but creating more opportunity will involve what I was talking about earlier, also providing more educational and job opportunities for families in the areas that are most in need of them.
Thank you. Morgan.
Yeah, so again, David's right. This does kind of speak to a broader conversation about affordability in Austin in general. And the state of our land development code. But just to kind of talk about affordable housing specifically and the blueprint, the easiest answer is build more affordable housing, right? But there, you know, there are different ways to kind of break that down. One is, how do we get that affordable housing built? Well, we need to be partnering very mindfully and equitably with developers to make sure that we're incentivizing them to actually do it, right? We need to be partnering with local nonprofits and community organizations to revitalize our neighborhoods and make them welcoming places to live. But then the other thing that we need to think about is not just, do we build the affordable housing, right? But where do we build it? And that's a contentious topic of debate, right? Because of course, we could just build it on the outskirts of the city and that would make it an easy problem to fix. But the reality is that that is exclusive and segregationist and not integrative. So how can we be equitable in the way that we build it? How can we build that into our existing neighborhoods so that people of all walks of life can live in any part of the city? And also, how can we do it in a way that makes it more accessible for, you know, people with different disabilities or people who need different housing requirements? And then one other thing to talk to as far as how do we do this and how do we incentivize, it's not really just about giving money or allowing for higher density, but it's also like really examining what is the permitting process? What does the construction process look like? How can we streamline that and not only make it simpler, but make sure that there aren't so many obstacles and complications that we don't get anywhere? So to kind of circle back to what I said in the first place, we need to build it, you know, and we need to be efficient and effective in the way that we do it, and we need to be equitable.
Thank you, Morgan. So again, I'll read the response that we got from Ms. Fuentes. Her reply was, first of all, we need affordable housing and we need it all over Austin. People in District 2 are unhappy that so much affordable housing gets planned for our district. It's not because they don't want it next to their house. They're unhappy because these projects are often put in places that are not convenient for public transportation and don't offer the services that more centralized locations would include. We need to do better to ensure projects that are built involved in affordable housing. We need to look at all city, county, and school district land for possible construction of affordable housing. Adding a few units of somewhat more affordable housing to a development for only a certain amount of years will not be good enough. The next question I'll ask is to do with Project Connect, which the council just voted to kind of move forward on. And the question was, as Project Connect rolls out, what is your vision to roll out for construction as far as priorities for construction over the next few years? And are you in support of the $8.75 tax increase proposed to pay for it? And I'll go ahead and give that, I'll go ahead and read the question first or read the response that Vanessa gave me and then ask the candidates. So her response was, I am supportive of Project Connect, though I wish there were more in it that will benefit District 2 community. Austin is one of the largest cities in the nation with such an underbuilt mass transit system. We have to do something now to plan for the projected level of growth proactively. I'd like a bus yard stationed south of the river, and we'll be actively advocating for it.
Yeah.
Help us ensure reliable, consistent bus service for South Austinites. So I'll go ahead and ask the question first to Morgan. Why don't you go ahead and tell us what you think?
So to address the second part of your question first, yes, I support the 8.75 cent tax increase. You know, we need to make investments in our community, even if that means paying up front for it. And we're going to reap a lot of benefits from it. Having more transportation alternatives means that we can significantly reduce our annual transportation costs, which are a big factor in the lack of affordability that we have here in Austin. But especially for our most vulnerable and lower income communities, having close by access to transportation expands their job opportunities, right? It gives them more access to the city. And so kind of to Vanessa's point, this isn't just about the idea of Project Connect, which is fantastic and I wholeheartedly support it, but it's about the construction and implementation, which goes to the first part of your question. And so there are a few things that I'm thinking about around construction. One is, again, to Vanessa's point, how are we making sure that our underrepresented parts of the city are being developed so that they have access to public transportation. I'd really like to see connections in the Tech Ridge area of District 7. The second thing that we need to be thinking about is what are the consequences of displacement during construction, which will very likely be going on for quite a while. And we need to stabilize and support our vulnerable communities so that they aren't displaced during this process, which is designed to help them and help everybody. And then the third thing that I want to talk about is transportation in and of itself is not enough to make the city connective, right? How can we build housing and affordable housing around the system that we're constructing right now? And how can we make this a true network so that people can get from one corner to the other, people have better access to opportunities and jobs, and it's easier for them to get to essential community services like daycare and you know, grocery stores and things that right now they might be a little bit far from.
Thank you, Morgan. David, I do want your response. Before, though, I just want to correct myself. I said $8.75. That is way off. It's 8.75 cents. My bad. That's just bad grammar.
It took me a second to say it correctly.
Yeah, sorry for everyone. I know everyone's snickering, and you should. Please roast me in the comments. David, please. Your answer.
Yeah, that's an important distinction. But thanks for the question. Yes, absolutely. I support Project Connect, and I think its success is for our community, including the tax rate proposal. For me, public transportation is a matter of social justice opportunity. It's not just whether people can get from point A to point B, but it's whether people have access to employment centers, to schools, to grocery stores, and so much more. And so I've been really proud to be a transit advocate alongside many of the folks that I see on this call for years, and to have worked on some of the proposals that have helped us lay the groundwork for what we are going to have in November. And you know, I've been advocating for more resources and more services for Southeast Austin for a very long time. And you know, we need a big, bold investment in transit and public transportation infrastructure, especially for Southeast Austin. You know, when I ride the bus and ride the 7 downtown, the people that I was riding with, a lot of them were transit dependent. They were workers who worked in the service industry or the building trades or hospitality, folks who didn't have another option for transportation and relied on the services that we offered. And so expand that. And, you know, I want to make sure that we are treating our public transit agencies not as a business, but as a public service, because that's what it is, to serve the people in our community who need it most. And so, you know, I will be out there supporting project this November. And if I have the honor of serving my community on the city council, I will make sure that these, you know, promises that are being made are followed through on in an effective and efficient way. Because the longer we wait, the more costly and more difficult it'll be to make these investments and these changes we need in our community.
Thank you. All right. This next question is about neighborhood combining conservation districts, or NCCDs. And so for the new land development code, what is your position as far as what is our relationship should be with those? So should NCCDs in the new code be dissolved, modified, preserved? I'll go ahead and give that question first to Morgan.
Yeah, I don't have a long, complex answer to this. I think if we've established that inclusion, affordability, and diversity and equity are our overarching goals, and that's our vision of Austin's future, then we need to examine every part of the land development code and ask, does that help us achieve our goal? And the easy answer for the NCCDs is no, they don't. They are exclusionary. They make it more difficult to develop in these neighborhoods. And the reality is that just, logistically, they make the process of rezoning or even talking about land development apart from single family zoning just that much more difficult. So yeah, that's what I've got on that.
Fair enough. David.
Thanks. So first, I'm going to talk about the land development code revision. I see this conversation as an opportunity to address some of the worst impacts that we've seen under our current code, which is based on a plan from 1928 that was racist and segregationist. And our code hasn't changed much, at least not since the 80s. And so I think that this is an opportunity to address the impacts of displacement, gentrification, sprawl, and flooding that are happening under our current code. The frustrating things about this process that I dealt with while I was working at City Hall is that if we are to take on a comprehensive revision of our land development code, then I don't think we should exclude from consideration for review any zoning tools, including NCCDs, including TODs and other regulating plans. I think we should review all of these tools, measure to what extent they support our ability to meet our housing needs and to center equity. And if they don't, then I don't think that we should carry them forward, especially if they create more barriers for those values and those goals that we've espoused.
Thank you. I'll go ahead and read Vanessa's response. She says, I support the creation of NCCDs or some form of historic preservation district in order to preserve Austin's historically Black and brown neighborhoods. I am open to a community conversation on what types of uses that entails. My community is vulnerable to displacement, so we must be vigilant in holding these conversations. The next question is, this one can be a lot of questions all at once, but the question we have is, with the COVID-19 pandemic likely to continue spreading for the next year, what is your strategy to help essential workers, renters, and vulnerable populations in Austin? And I'll go ahead and ask that one first to David.
Thank you. And I spoke a little bit to this at the beginning, but I mentioned that recently I had the chance to work as a community liaison for Travis County, working alongside Constable George Morales to provide food, protective equipment, and other essential resources to our Southeast Austin community. And so that experience and seeing the need and the suffering that is out there in our community really highlighted for me just how severe the impact of the pandemic is, and what kind of effects it has had on our community, and how that will reverberate for a long time to come. And so, I am calling for adopting really robust protections for workers, guaranteeing emergency paid sick leave for part-time, temporary, tipped, self-employed workers, people who aren't typically included in many of the existing programs or in the funding that we receive from the federal or state government. We need to stabilize child care centers, especially for those families that are most vulnerable in our community. And we need to educate both employers and workers on the guidelines that are in place for, that were created by medical experts and public health experts to make sure that people are following the guidelines. And we need to enforce those guidelines as well to keep people safe. And I really support the actions that the council took to provide resources through the RISE program, and establishing eviction moratoriums and notice to vacate moratoriums, providing utility assistance, housing assistance, rental assistance, and protecting workers even further. But as we've seen, our community is still suffering a lot. And like I said earlier, we are still being disproportionately impacted. And so I would work to support those types of programs, but expand them significantly as well. Because this has been awful to see. I have had people close to me, neighbors and friends who have lost loved ones and people who have been furloughed and have lost their jobs, and are just facing economic ruin, facing just some of the worst effects of the pandemic. And so this is something that I would absolutely prioritize. There's nothing more important right now.
Thank you. Morgan.
Yeah, I think just to reiterate a lot of what David said, the pandemic has exacerbated issues that have existed for a long time. And now, because of things like lack of affordability, lack of affordable transportation, lack of workers' rights and decent wages, people who were already vulnerable are now more vulnerable. And those happen to be our low income residents, those happen to be our essential workers, and those happen to very often be communities of color. So for me, on top of expanding support, financial support, resource support, relief and assistance, it's not just about how do we make more money available, it's what do we do with it? How do we ensure that we are equitably distributing it so that those most impacted get the most support, right? So that involves things like making sure that there's more proactive outreach from the city government to all of these communities. That means establishing partnerships with community organizations, agencies, and leaders across all communities, not only to distribute this relief, but also to increase education and awareness. And again, to David's point, we need to really be working with employers to make sure that they are held to a high standard so that their workers are protected, because those who are essential are already at greater risk of contracting COVID. They also tend to have less access to insurance and affordable health care, and they're going to take that illness home and maybe spread it to their family, right? So it's kind of this like vicious downward spiral where those already vulnerable become increasingly more vulnerable, and then they are getting sick because they don't know or they don't have a choice. People should not have to choose between working and being well, right? That's not a black and white issue, and that's not it's a false dichotomy is what I'm trying to say. If I had my way, we would have universal paid sick leave, unlimited, but we can talk about the stipulations of that. But I also want to talk about not just individuals, but minority and women-owned businesses, right? So there was talk of diverting 50% of the hotel occupancy tax toward the Black Lives Fund, which would provide relief for specifically Black musicians and Black-owned music venues. The music scene in Austin is something I'm very passionate about, and it's kind of the bedrock of our culture and our economy, and it's something that we need to protect as well. So again, this isn't just about expanding programs, right? We need to be thinking about how are we most effectively connecting people with the resources that are available for them, educating them and creating awareness, and also protecting them when they have to go to work. And then on top of that, not just thinking about individuals, but protecting the small businesses who employ much more people than, some of the biggest corporations that exist.
Thank you. And I'll go ahead and read Vanessa's response. She said, "My budget priorities during COVID is to ensure more direct financial assistance to working families, regardless of status. Additionally, we need to invest more in public health. Nearly 30% of my community is uninsured, so we need to do more to help families access critical health services. I'd also like to see more investment in mental health services." Okay, the next three questions weren't from the questionnaire. They're just additional ones that we prepared for this forum. So unfortunately, it'll just be y'all's responses, and we really appreciate y'all being here to answer them for us. The first one is kind of back to our land development code concerns. Even when a new land development code passes, many homes will still have deed restrictions to them, saying that they'll supersede any changes in the land development code, and those can say how high or how far back a home can be, how much can be in each lot. So the question is, what is your stance on deed restrictions in homes, and do you have any suggestions or policy changes for how to affect these deed restrictions? And I'll go ahead and ask David first.
Yeah, I think, I think that's a really big issue that that we've seen come up time and time again when we were working on zoning cases at council. And I think I need to learn a little bit more about kind of what our legal ability is to address some of those, because you're right, there are some deed restrictions that, like I said before, include throwbacks all the way to, mentioning servant quarters and things like that. I mean, that are, that are steeped in racism and, are from a different era. And so, I think this is a conversation that we need to have with, with like legal department and housing and planning experts to figure out how exactly we can go about addressing that. But I think you're right in mentioning that, even if a new land development is implemented, that doesn't address all of the challenges and issues that we've been talking about, the displacement and the gentrification and all of that. That this is going to be ongoing work that, like I said before, is going to take the whole community to keep building, helping to preserve and create more affordable housing opportunities and help us develop and plan a development in a way that is just more sustainable and inclusive in general.
Thank you. Morgan.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot to consider around deed restrictions, not just the people who have the deeds, but also the choice of the city to honor those deeds and the language within them, but also some of maybe the restrictions or limitations at the state level. So there's a lot to think about there. And to David's point, it's difficult to have a really easy answer to how to overcome that. So we have to get creative with our solutions. But I do think we need to think about land development code as how do we get buy-in from all community members so that this is a joint effort to make Austin more inclusive. I'm a renter. I've struggled with affordability in this city as a teacher, as an educator. I know what it's like to live on a high traffic corridor where the balcony is so loud that I can't use it. And I know what it's like to not be able to live within 20 miles of my job. So to me, affordability is really important, but I don't think that this renters versus homeowners battle is effective or productive or really getting us where we need to go. And the reality is that the effective solutions for this city benefit everybody. So I would say that part of my creative solution pertains to getting buy-in from the people who own that property and talking about what would it look like to increase density in your neighborhood without it being commercial apartment towers. And like David said, that's something that I continue to research and look more into so that we can come up with more concrete solutions.
Thank you. All right. Next is, you may have seen whispers about Tesla possibly moving a plant close to Austin and how the city will respond to either encourage or disencourage their decision to locate here. So the question is kind of overarching, more than just this one company. Do you have a particular policy or principle in mind for getting new businesses to come to Austin, or when new businesses are interested, like how our relationship should be with them? And I'll go ahead and ask Morgan first.
Yeah, it seems like we're kind of in a situation as a country where companies have us over a barrel, right? They're offering, well, we're going to bring jobs to your city, and if you don't give it to us for free and, with either reduced or no taxes for X amount of years, then we'll just go somewhere else. But the reality is that they need us as much as we need them, and we can be more productive and successful in those conversations and walk away from them not only having a job come to Austin, but also have them bear some corporate responsibility. And that just doesn't mean paying taxes. I was reading an article recently about a company like Microsoft actually investing in affordable housing in the cities where they were building offices. So we need to acknowledge the fact that big tech is one of the big contributors to our huge growth spurt, and they can also be a part of the solution. How can we partner with them not only to invest more in our public transportation network, but also offer more diverse and more affordable housing options. I actually, in my workforce and job training development time, partnered with Toyota out of San Antonio, who recognized when they went to San Antonio that there was a gap between the number of skilled workers they needed and the number that San Antonio actually had. So they partnered with our nonprofit organization to offer free education and free career and skilled training classes for their employees so that they could meet the need that they already had. And I thought that was a really effective and successful way of empowering the San Antonio community to be a part of that growth, instead of just inviting people from other cities that have those skills to fill those jobs.
Thank you. David.
Well, thanks. Yeah, I don't want to be too redundant or repetitive, because I think that those were some really good points, and some of the things that I've been working on, to try to provide avenues for those companies that are operating here in our community to be able to provide support to help us address some of our big challenges, including our public transportation and traffic challenges, including our efforts to end homelessness. And so I think that because of the workers, like the workers from my community that I was talking about before, our city is very attractive to tech companies and and other groups that are trying to expand or like have campuses like like Tesla and recently Oracle and other groups like that. And so for me, here's the big issue to address. People talk about the Texas miracle and the economic activity that we've had here, but the reality is that so many people have been left behind, and many of those are the people in my community. The reason they've been left behind is that when these companies have come here, they have either brought with them a lot of people from other parts of our country, but the issue is they have created jobs that are unattainable because they require high levels of education or specialized training and certifications that my community has not had access to. Or alternatively, they've created pay a living wage and are not enough for a family to be able to sustain themselves. And so I think it's important to help create jobs. And this is a conversation that we had recently when the Travis County Commissioner's Court was considering providing economic incentives to Tesla. And I went there with members of my labor union to say, of course, our community wants to see middle-income jobs, but we also want assurances and protections and living wage standards for the workers in our community to make sure that we're not left behind. And so I think that's the approach that I would take. We want, there are parts of our district, especially in far Southeast Austin, that want economic, but I just want to make sure that as we make these decisions, we are thinking about and prioritizing the workers in our community who are most vulnerable and who don't just deserve the chance to remain and survive here, but deserve the chance to thrive.
Thank you. I have just two more prepared responses, and then we can ask folks in the chat, if you have any questions, please start writing them now. Second to last, so one of the big topics that's been hitting Austin lately is, how we've decided to move forward with reallocating funds from our police department. The city council voted, I believe it was $120 million over the next few years. And so my question to y'all is, as candidates who will be potentially making the decisions for those for the next few years, what do you see as the priorities for those funds to be reallocated, and what kind of relationship with ADP do you hope to have? And I'll ask David first.
Thanks. I was really proud of the action that the council took to begin the process of reallocating, decoupling, and reimagining the way that we do public safety in our community. And that was an initial step, but you're right that the future council, is representing our council seats, we'll have to not just figure out, reallocating money, but changing our laws and changing our policies and departmental policies and changing the culture at APD to create systems of public safety that benefit in all of our communities. And I think that is an extremely important role that the council will play. And I think it's our obligation to understand the moment that we're in and the opportunities that we have, not just to make small incremental change, but to really form the way that our systems that are meant to uphold justice and provide public safety function. And that is something that, as we continue to work on, needs to prioritize the inclusion of voices of the people who are most impacted by these issues and the people who have been most impacted by these injustices. And I want to say it's not just about public safety, it's not just about policing, but the systemic racism that we are trying to dismantle impacts so many other issues, including housing discrimination, employment discrimination, and all of these things that we've been talking about tonight. And so for me, this is one of the most important issues. And I would try to facilitate and create ways and empower our community to be more involved, and for more of those voices that I mentioned of people with relevant lived experience so that they can be included as well.
Thank you. And Morgan.
Yeah, so similar to what David said, I think that the APD budget that was passed is a good start. But we also have to ask ourselves, how did we get here in the first place, right? What decisions have been made over the last 5 years, 10 years, 20 years to get us to a place where people are being murdered by the police and there's little transparency and accountability, and yet our essential community services are severely underfunded. So when I think about the possible implications of the APD budget as it stands, and sort of how I see it aligning with like a vision of Austin, of an equitable, inclusive Austin, I think about a couple things. One, to circle back to something I said earlier, is if we have an overarching goal of supporting people in time of need and being an inclusive, welcoming, equitable community, we need to be funding the things that work, right? And so as residents and as city leaders, we need to regularly examine what we are funding, what we're investing in, and measuring progress. And if that's not working, then we need to do something different. As it happens, funding essential community services like affordable health and mental health care, access to food assistance and nutritional programs, social work, quality education, I could go on and on. Those are the things that lift people out of poverty. Those are the things that stabilize the folks who are vulnerable right now. And those are the things that ultimately reduce crime. So if our goal is to reduce crime, we need to be doing what works. The other thing that I want to speak to again is the idea of transparency and accountability. This is something that we should expect from any office, any agency, any organization, and frankly, any individual, right? This isn't about a blame game. This is not saying the police are bad. This is saying you are a sworn officer whose mission is to protect and serve. Also, you have weapons on you. And that, studies show that power dynamic can be abused, and it can also be used actually to protect people. And we're not using it the way that it should be utilized. So how can we create independent, nonpartisan agencies to perform these functions that need to be done with transparency and accountability? And how can we make sure that those who do well are rewarded, and that those who, violate our societal norms and violate laws and violate the safety of the public are held accountable for that? But in the broader conversation of public safety and what is crime and what causes it and what makes the public safe, we really need to rethink the way that we think about our neighbors. There's this narrative being told after the passing of this APD budget that APD is being defunded, that there will no longer be emergency response services, that crime will run rampant because there's no enforcement of anything. And the reality is that that's not true. The goal is to take those civilian functions and put them in civilian agencies' hands so that police can focus on the things that they need to focus on, but also gives us the opportunity to examine, like, is Austin really that unsafe? Are we really running rampant with crime and poverty? And the truth is that Austin is a safe city overall, for some more than others, I would say, and maybe not in the way that those who are rioting against this APD budget believe. But, you know, we need to think about what is the impact of broken windows policing? What is the impact of law and order and tough on crime mentality? And is that really serving the public and the community the way that we want to? I don't think so. I think that we have a lot of people in Austin telling us that they don't feel safe, that they want to be heard and acknowledged and supported. And we need to do everything that we can to let them know we hear them and to make sure that we address this issue equitably for everybody.
Thank you. The last prepared question I have is a pretty broad one, and it's just something to consider as we move forward in this year dealing with COVID-19, is what is your strategy for outreach to your constituents when maintaining social distance is so important? And I'll go ahead and give that one to David first.
Thanks. I think it's something that, you know, is causing us to really become really creative and innovative. And I've had some experience already doing this. Like I mentioned earlier, most recently worked on doing outreach for the 2020 census, specifically in hard to count communities, which includes immigrants and Spanish speaking communities and folks who are more physically hard to reach for census workers, including, you know, people who may live in mobile home parks or apartments with restricted access. And so, you know, our plan was to do a whole lot of in-person outreach. But of course, you know, thinking about people's health and safety, we weren't able to do that. And so, you know, we implemented all kinds of new strategies, including, you know, doing a lot of virtual outreach, doing a lot of phone calls, reaching people where they were getting access to other services, including food distributions and protective equipment distributions. And so I think that it's, you know, continuing that, because in my community, there are a lot of folks who are disengaged because they feel disenfranchised, and they not that historically, you know, they have been underrepresented, which is the case. And so I think in our district, especially, it's important not just to be available, but to proactively do community engagement and do community outreach and go in to ask folks what it is that they need and how it is that we can help. Because for a long time, people have come in from outside of our neighborhoods to tell us what they think is best for us. But our campaign is about empowering our community, about facilitating engagement and participation so that our community can have our own voice, so that we can speak for ourselves. And so I think, you know, whether you're talking about doing outreach for this campaign, or, you know, if I have the honor of serving on the city council, doing outreach as a council member, I mean, I think that for District 2, it's extremely important to bring our local government to our community and to our neighborhoods to provide the services that people need and want to see from their local government.
Thank you. And Morgan, please.
Yeah, to kind of echo David there, I think, you know, what's important in a campaign when your goal is to engage with and amplify the voices of the underrepresented, they tend to be the ones that are harder to get to connect with. And now we're in a pandemic, and it's even harder because, you know, as we witnessed firsthand while going door to door to collect ballot petition signatures. It's a challenge, and people are like, why are you knocking on my door? So it needs to be a grassroots campaign. It needs to be a proactive campaign. And when I say grassroots, it needs to be virtually and digitally grassroots. So we've been getting really creative about how do we get connected with these communities through virtual events, but not just virtual events, right? But through virtual spaces. So thinking about, apart from official organizations and associations, where are these online communities that renters, that communities of color exist in groups, and what are the issues that they care about, and how do we connect that way? But one of the things that's also really important to me is not going and connecting and saying, hey, I'm a candidate and I want to represent you, please support me, but just going to listen and going to ask people what's important to you. Tell me what you're struggling with, right? And really just engaging with a diverse group at all, I think, to make sure that they feel heard. Again, to David's point, many people feel disenfranchised, and that's one of the things that motivated me to run. I was actually kind of feeling disenchanted myself, and realizing that, so many people go unrepresented. And if I can run for city council, hopefully I can activate people to go exercise their vote, right? And go advocate for themselves and for their community. But we're also trying to get really creative about how we think about voters, right? So not just a standalone voter in and of themselves, but who are they connected to, and how can we use that as sort of like a grassroots effort to get connected as broadly and as deeply as possible in the virtual space, and through things like mailers and door hangers and things like that as we weather this pandemic.
Thank you all. I really appreciate you taking the time to answer those questions. We have just a few that some of the audience have asked and put into the chat. Timothy Bray has been collecting those and curating them up for us. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it off to Tim to ask those questions.
Hi, sorry, my internet was acting up for a second. First question is from Roger Colvin is, what is your stance on parking requirements? I guess we'll start with David.
Okay. I guess this a questionnaire question, but it was yes or no, and so I'm glad that you're asking it. So we have a little bit of an opportunity to expand on it. And I answered the question actually was, do you support reducing or eliminating parking minimums in new development? And it was a yes or no question, like I said. So I answered yes, but I did want to explain. I support reducing minimum parking requirements broadly, and I support eliminating them entirely for project public transit, and could better utilize the resources that they have and the space that they have to provide affordable housing or other community benefits and amenities.
Right, Morgan?
Yeah, so my easy answer to that is yes, I'm in favor of eliminating parking requirements, but I think there are a couple of things that we need to recognize when we talk about that. One is, we want to reduce a parking surface area because there's much better use of that space. But also it kind of speaks to the perpetuation of environmental and sustainability issues, but also kind of negates the intentions of something like Project Connect or like an active mobility bond, right? So it's important to think about all those factors. And we also need to think about who might be impacted by completely eliminating parking requirements, and make sure that the city and housing and transportation remains accessible for everybody in the event that they need that spot. So yes, eliminating broadly, and then, when you kind of drill down into it, what can we be mindful of and how can we be accessible when we think about it?
Cool, thank you. All right, next question is from Mike Nakehouse. Lately, there has been a trend to ignore experts. When as an economist, I told Leslie Poole that the way to lower the price of rent was to increase the supply of housing. She said, I don't think supply and demand applies to commodities like housing. Will you listen to experts? Will you increase the supply of housing and help lower rents, which which sometimes makes up more than 50% of low-income families' budgets. And Morgan first.
Yeah, one of the things that I really value is having a bunch of really knowledgeable subject matter experts around me, but also people who just have like personal experience with the issue so that I can get as full and broad an understanding of an issue as possible before thinking about decisions and solutions, because what I want to be able to do is identify root causes in order to develop the most effective solutions to implement. So, you know, well-educated, experienced, and knowledgeable people who understand these things perhaps better than I do are much more qualified to provide insight into those than me just kind of making a blanket decision and disregarding that voice. So like I said, most issues, including housing and affordability, are not, as I said, not black and white. It's a false dichotomy. There are many facets of it that we need to consider, and I want to know what those facets are before I start making decisions.
All right, and David, I know you said you had a hard time hearing, so just basically, what are your thoughts on listening to experts as far as supply and demand on housing and addressing that it makes up 50% of low-income families' budgets?
Yeah, absolutely. This is something that I learned very early on and had a chance to experience when I worked at City Hall. You know, the role of the council members is to provide policy direction for over 40 different departments. And you can't expect them to be experts in every single one, right? They're making decisions that range from to Austin Energy to planning and zoning and transportation. And so you absolutely have to rely on the counsel and advice of experts. And you know, that is something where I've, through my work, I've built a lot of really great relationships with some of the smartest affordable housing and public transportation experts in our city, and even outside of our city. You know, also we depend on the experts who make up. And I want to emphasize a point that I said earlier. It's not just about policy or academic expertise, but exercise and rely on people with lived experiences. And for any of the decisions that we make that impact affordability and impact quality of life, we absolutely need to be relying on both topic and policy experts, as well as experts with lived experience from our communities.
All right, thank you. Next question is from Tommy Yates and David first. Regarding annexation, Austin has had a long history of favoring upper income tracts versus lower middle working class areas, particularly on the east side. In light of the Tesla plan announcement, what are your feelings about annexation in general and what approach Austin should take?
Well, we have annexation down in Del Valley over in recent years. I'm not sure, Tommy, that I understand exactly what it is that your question is getting at. But absolutely, if we are going to annex, you know, as our community grows, especially down here in Southeast Austin, if we're going to annex, I mean, we need to make sure that we are not essentially discriminating, and that you're talking about against, you know, communities and neighborhoods that where families with lower incomes may live.
All right, Morgan?
Sorry, I lost my mute button for a second. Yeah, I think I'm going to echo what David said once again and say I'm not 100% sure I understand exactly what you're asking with the question, but to the point of annexation, I do think that we need to be mindful about the implications of it. It's not inherently a good or bad thing, but the way that it is implemented can definitely be inequitable. And the reality is that we can have areas of you know, cities within cities and other areas within Austin that are reaping the benefits of city services without necessarily paying into them or being responsible for them. So especially as we kind of speak to the broader conversation about equity for displaced, vulnerable, and underrepresented communities, we need to have their priorities and their well-being and livelihood in mind when we make those decisions.
Tim, are you muted?
Thank you. Sorry about that. My bad. Next question is from Jason Bridgman. Do you agree with council's toleration of the continued employment of Brian Manley as chief of police? As chief of police, and if not, will you lead an effort starting on your first day in office to remove him?
Am I starting on that one? Okay, so easy answer is no, I do not approve. Easy answer is yes, I do think that he needs to be removed. And the reason behind that kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, which is we have a broken system that lacks accountability and transparency. And if that system wasn't broken and it was properly reformed, he probably wouldn't be sitting in the position that he's in. He probably would not be posting the disparaging remarks he posts about some of our protesters. But also, he wouldn't be still in office allowing people to go without consequences for their behavior. Sworn officers should be held to a higher standard in our community because they have so much authority, and we are kind of like, we are vulnerable to the way that they utilize that authority or power. So I know that there are some difficulties, or I guess complexities around the processes in city government about how that might work, but I would definitely be in favor of it.
David?
Yeah, this is something that I actually put out a public statement on at this point several months ago. We need justice and we need accountability in our community. And as we are working to reimagine the way that our public safety institutions work and what their role is in our community and how they can better serve justice and better serve all of the members of our community, we need to have public safety leaders who understand that their role is to work in partnership with the community and in partnership with our elect to create that progress and to create that accountability. And so, yes, when I made the statement that I mentioned earlier, which I'd be glad to share with y'all, was a statement about the ongoing protest for justice and expressing my unequivocal support for them. I also called for Manley's resignation, as well as for the for accountability and for justice for the protesters who were injured. And I'm sure y'all have read a whole lot about that, and to prohibit the use of certain types of force, the so-called less lethal force that was used against those protesters when they began in earnest in our community. And
All right, thank you. Another question from Mike Nahas. Are you in favor of more single room occupancy of hotels to reduce homelessness? David?
yeah, I think that ending something that requires our entire community to come together. And yes, I think that we need to take, it's a very needed issue, and I think we need to get, most importantly, at the root causes of homelessness. But as we are dealing with, addressing that challenge that we already have now, yes, I absolutely think that is a strategy that we should move forward with.
Morgan?
Yeah, so I think the question isn't necessarily should we be buying hotels and things like that to address homelessness, but what are we doing with them? Having a hotel in and of itself does not solve the issue of homelessness, as we can see right now, with the fact that a lot of people are still experiencing homelessness, even though some of those have been purchased. So to David's point, there are two ways to think about homelessness. One is, how do we prevent it from happening in the first place? Because frankly, homelessness is kind of a reflection of our failure as a community to support people who need support. And so we need to really be thinking about, well, how do we prevent them from getting there in the first place? But also, once they are there, how do we not only house them, but connect them with the differentiated supports, resources, and services that can help them stabilize, right? And help them be healthy and have access to the things they need. And kind of to that point, not only do we need to be centralizing those services around housing, but we also need really robust systems of measurement for success and progress. You know, one thing I don't really hear about a lot is, well, what does it look like for us to be successful in addressing homelessness? What does it look like for people who are experiencing it to not be homeless anymore? And that kind of depends on how they got there in the first place and the specific resources they need. So I really want to see some robust implementation around this. I want to see action on it. And I want to make sure that it's effective as possible so that we can support those in our community who are experiencing it right now.
All right, thank you. So this was my question. As you may know, Austin has one of the largest minimum lot sizes in the country. It might be the largest, but I don't want to say that if it isn't, but I believe it might be. It's 5,700 square feet. So my question is, what do you think the minimum lot size should be?
I'll start. I don't know if I have an answer for you, but when I was talking about what we can do to meet the goals of our strategic housing blueprint, I do think that one of the strategies we homes in smaller lots. And I think that can help with affordability and it can help us create more of the missing middle housing that we need.
I don't know. What if we had a radical idea like completely eliminating lot sizes? So to answer that question seriously, though, or more seriously, I suppose, I don't think that there's a blanket answer to that. Yes, the minimum lot size needs to be decreased significantly. I would say more than half. But like I've been saying kind of throughout this discussion, we need to be differentiating our solutions and policies based on how they fit into that specific part of the community. So thinking about what's going to go in that part of the neighborhood, or, you know, things like that. So yeah, like David, I don't have one specific number for you, but I think it needs to be drastically reduced, not increased. Reduced.
So I'll put a plug out for more questions because it's the end of what we got, but I have a question for each candidate. And that is, if there was any question you wish we would ask, what is it? And then what is your answer to that question? Oh, we'll start with Morgan.
I was going to say, are we playing chicken, David? Okay. Actually, I think you asked really comprehensive questions that sort of addressed a lot of the issues that we had here. Maybe something around what can we do to provide alternatives to car transportation besides just rail system and buses. You know, we have a bond coming up related to active mobility, bike lanes, sidewalks, but also kind of making the amenities around public transportation more appealing and accessible so people actually want to use them. So yeah, I would have loved to have that question and talk about that as, again, part of a really comprehensive connectivity plan, including things like subsidizing public transportation for those who are most dependent on it, maybe providing bigger rebates and subsidizing things like e-bikes. So really encouraging people not to use a car anymore. And that's going to address a lot of the issues we have, not only around the connectivity, especially in the outskirts and outer corners of the city, for those who are most dependent on it, but also addressing things around sustainability and air quality and environment.
All right, and David?
Yeah, well, Timothy, I'm interested in hearing your thoughts on minimum lot size, but to answer your question right now, I think that I've already answered it, but the question, one of the questions that I wish that were asked more often, not just by this group, but other groups, ensure that the voices of low-income families, working families, and people of color are included. Because we've talked about and identified a lot of the challenges that our community is facing. And I sincerely believe that part of the reason that some of these challenges are so great is because those voices haven't been included, including in planning processes, including in housing policy, including in transportation policy. And I think that, those of us who are in this, those of us who are engaged, should do all that we can to make sure that those voices are. And I think that, I think if we're talking about how do we create opportunity, how do we create justice and equity, I think that that's absolutely something that we need to talk about. And I think that's something that we all need to reflect on and work on and prioritize.
Thank you. And my answer to the question, by the way, is I think we should just get rid of them, but I'm sure that doesn't surprise anyone. Anyway, for the minimum lot sizes. So next question is from Kai, and he's asking, what are your plans to deal with the LDC Land Development Code rewrite lawsuit? And David first.
Okay, yeah, I'll go first since Morgan went first. But I think we have somewhat limited ability in this. It's in the courts, and one of my concerns is that the ruling that came down on LDC may be so broad that it might impact some of our other policy that we're working on. To help preserve and promote affordable housing and to support our transit system. But I think as of right now, it's in the courts. And so we have to wait and see what the next steps are.
Morgan?
Yeah, that was actually going to be pretty much my response. So I don't have much more to add other than the fact that, unfortunately, Austin being the city that it is, we sometimes struggle with some of the limitations and restrictions at the state level because, the things related to legal, but I'm not sure what we can do right now, and that's something that I'm researching more so I can have a better response for it.
All right, and then we have we're running towards the end of our time, so we'll have one more question. This is from Patricia Schaub, how do the candidates feel about converting car lanes for use by other modes, i.e. bikes, walking, micromobility, or turning street space into public space and closing streets completely to cars?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic idea. And, if our plans around connectivity and transportation and mobility development are well implemented, and we're also focusing on how affordability and building housing and community services and resources around that can be done in tandem, then that would be a fantastic idea. Again, we need to incentivize people to use something besides a car. So, and get outside and utilize the space that's available to them. So I'm absolutely in favor of that, and want to make sure that it's implemented as part of this overarching plan to make Austin more accessible and more connective.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that, and I'll just keep my answer brief. I've been really proud to work on multimodal transportation solutions and to support active mobility and previous bond efforts and through my work at council. And transit is one of my priorities and will continue to be. It's something that our city is lagging on compared to cities of our size. Those are investments that we should have made years ago, probably decades ago. And it's something that can help connect people to our transit network. It can be complementary. And so, yeah, I absolutely will continue my support for those things.
Okay, and now I'll let Cesar close this out.
Again, just want to say thank you both of you for participating in today's forum. Thank you to everyone who joined our forum to ask questions and listened in. This is being recorded, and as soon as I figure it out, we will upload it to our Facebook page. So encourage and share it so that more people can hear from these great and talented candidates. Before we end, I do want to give each of you a few minutes to close out. Any last words, anything you'd like to plug or say? I'll go ahead and start with Morgan, just 2 minutes or so, and then we'll close out.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you to everybody again for the opportunity, not only to talk to you, but hear some of your questions and be able to respond to them. And I think it's important to keep in mind as we're talking about things like affordability, mobility and transportation, access to resources. It's not just about what do we want to happen and what do we want to see happen in Austin, but also, are we listening to our residents? Are we proactively reaching out, connecting, and gathering input so that we can come to conclusions and implement solutions that work for everybody? Like I said at the beginning of this conversation, Austin aspires to be progressive. We have a long way to go. And while the pandemic has exposed some of the vulnerabilities of our community and in many ways exacerbated them, they've existed for a long time. So it's clear that the solutions we have in place right now just aren't working. And so when thinking about what leadership is going to be able to take on these big challenges and bold challenges, we need people who are just ready with all the answers, but are willing to problem solve, and not only problem solve, but collaborate and be solution focused so that we can actually take action on these things and see the plan and the vision that we have for Austin's future realized. And not just for us, not just the people who care about this stuff all the time, but those who are the most disenfranchised and perhaps the most disenchanted from this political and government process and community involvement process, so that they recognize that they do have power in their voice, they do have power in their vote, they matter in our community, and we want to support them. Thank you.
So, thank you again for the opportunity to be here. I was looking at all the people who joined the call, and I see a lot of friendly faces and a lot of people that I've had a chance to collaborate with in the past. And so I want to say thank you all as a group, but also to the individuals on here who know that I'm talking to you, for all the work that you've done to support equity and sustainability in our community, including your support for the 2018 Affordable Housing Bond, your support for the 2016 Mobility Bond campaign that I worked on, that included significant funding for active mobility, and before laid some of the groundwork for the items that we'll have on the November ballot. And I've enjoyed working with you in the past, forward to continuing to work with you. And if you want to join our campaign, if you want to be a part of it, please reach out. You can, it's just david4d2.com, or I'm happy to share my contact information with y'all as well. Please do reach out. We are building really broad, diverse coalitions because we have an ambitious plan for change and to bring representation to our community, or the folks that we've been talking about who need our support, who need our leadership, to be able to remain, to be able to survive, to be able to thrive in our community. And I think that, our community is going to overcome. We're going to get past this pandemic. We're going to get past this action. And when we do, we have to aim higher than returning to normal. We have to aim higher than returning to business as usual. Resolve to really work for justice and equity in our community and to do things differently. And thank you again. Please find us, david4d2.com.
Thank you, guys. And please feel free to post in the chat your contact information so folks can reach out to you.
Thank you, Timothy. And again, thank both of you so much for joining us in our first forum. Our next forum is going to be Wednesday, September 2nd at 7 p.m. for District 4 and 10 candidates. And then after that, the following Wednesday, we'll be having one for District 6. At the end of which, our Aura membership will have the chance to vote and endorse candidates for this year. If you are not an Aura member and would like to become one to have a chance to vote on that endorsement, please go to aura-atx.org and become a member today. One last time, thank you so much, David Chincanchan, Morgan Witt. Y'all are great, and I really hope to see y'all next time. Thank you, everyone, for joining us tonight, and be safe.
Thanks so much. Have a good one.
Thanks.